When I first met Sam Peckinpah, he asked me a question. The question was, why do you want to write this book on me? And I said, because, Sam, I believe that in 100 years, if we're still able to show films, your films will still be shown. I think that, and among them, Straw Dogs, Wild Bunch, Ride the High Country. I mean, they only made 14 films, but each one of them, I think, is really worth looking at. Some are extraordinary and deserve to be looked at over and over again. And Straw Dogs is one of those. It has so many subtleties within it. It's rare to find a film which exists on so many different levels that you can watch it a number of times and get something new each time you come to it. And that's what you get from Straw Dogs. We wound up ultimately striking a friendship that really lasted for a long, long time. But Sam tested everybody. Sam was absolutely the most difficult person. He wanted you to prove that you really loved him. And the way he did that was to make it as difficult as humanly possible for you to express that. And so we would wind up, I mean, to give you some idea of how it worked, after I'd finished writing, I wrote the first 6 chapters of the book, and I sent it to Sam, and I sent it to his brother, Denver, and who was the Superior Court judge in Fresno, California. And Sam, I didn't hear from at all for a long, long time. But Denver got back to me immediately, and he said, "You've got to come out here. I've got to talk to you." So I was in Chicago, so I flew out to L.A. and drove up to Fresno, and I walk in, we sit down, and first thing out of Denver's mouth is, "You're being entirely too kind to this man." And he proceeded to point out what was right and what was wrong with what I had written. And from that, I just scrapped the first 6 chapters completely, threw them away, and started over, and completely reworked the manuscript from there. 18 months go by, and I finally get this letter from Sam. He's finally read it. And the letter begins something like, "I hate this book. Stop writing. Do not go further. If you need to write this, maybe you wanted somebody to collaborate with." And he gave me the name of a guy. Anyway, I was so angry with him over this that I sat down without really waiting 24 hours to let myself cool off, and I fired a letter right back to him. I said, "Thanks for your letter, but you're a little late. Your brother's already given me everything I need to know, and I'm in the process of tearing your life from tonsils to scrotum, and when it's over with, it's going to be my view on you, not your view on you, and good luck." And I sent it off, and 3 days later I got a telegram saying, "Love the letter, write the book that way, love Sam Peckinpah." Now, the purpose of what he did was, I've been always convinced, is that if I had fallen down, if I had been mortified or troubled by what he'd given me, if I hadn't really come back at him, he would have wound up just ignoring me completely. That would be the end of it. But because I fought him over it, and I fought him over it a lot. We had a lot of fights over what would be in the book and what wouldn't be in the book. But he was extremely supportive, and what was unique about Sam was that he wanted it really to be an unvarnished portrait. He didn't want this to be something that glossed over all of his problems. He was totally unafraid of the truth. If I learned nothing else from Sam, it was that you had to be honest. That honesty was the most important thing in filmmaking and in everything. That you can't allow yourself to create something that in fact is based on a lie. And he would strip away all these veneers that we have, and I think we have a lot of them in life, in which we try and tell ourselves half-truths or untruths to make it easier to deal with whatever it is. If you look at a film like Straw Dogs, one of the things which really strikes me immediately is that it's a film that will not let me off the hook. I may not like what I see, but it's part of the human condition. And ultimately is what really filmmaking, that's important filmmaking, is about. Can we explore ourselves and our emotions on screen in a way that is as naked and honest as we can be? And that's what Sam was. And Sam was, in fact, an extremely difficult human being. I used to say that literally he's like someone who had to find out how close to the edge he could walk. And the only way you can do that is you have to fall over the edge. Well, he would fall regularly. I mean, he would go so far that he would be absolutely in fear of his own life, I think. I mean, if you look at the fact that he died at 59, he looked 80. And that was because he poured 80 years in 59 through 59, and his body just couldn't take it. Ultimately, he wound up being somebody who was really it was self-destructive in many ways because the demons inside him kept forcing him to be honest with whatever it was he was doing. He was a filmmaker who was an artist, and he used film as a way of exploring the human condition. And because of what he did, he wound up putting himself at risk. He would fight his way through his films. Conflict was really part of the creative process, and unless you fought with him, you really couldn't get to know him. And he didn't want you. I mean, he would create hostilities between himself and the producers he worked with. And it took a very strong producer to get a film from him because he wasn't going to let you go easy. And so he was a heavy drinker. The thing that destroyed him ultimately was drugs more than alcohol. He didn't come to drugs until very late. In terms of drugs that are really devastating, like cocaine. It was a time in the 70s in the middle of the 70s, when cocaine became the sort of social drug of choice. There was this myth that began that somehow it really wasn't devastating to your body, that it was done in good company, and it was like, I mean, I can remember people saying to me, well, it's just like having a glass of fine champagne. Wrong. I mean, go to any hospital and take a look at a vial of cocaine, and it has a skull and crossbones on it. It's going to kill you. Ultimately, you will do yourself in, and it did, Sam. I mean, it was the saddest part of what I saw. I mean, if I have anything I really wish hadn't happened, I wish he had never ever gotten involved with that part of. But Sam, I think the way to look at Sam is that Sam lived himself to death. There's nothing he was afraid to try. When Caravaggio died in a shipwreck off the coast of Spain, his paintings washed ashore. And it was said at the time that the best of Caravaggio had survived. I feel the same way about Sam's films. I mean, the best of Sam still survives. He lived through his films. He put on film what he passionately cared about, and those films are what we have today. And they tell us things about not only him, but about ourselves. I think he's unfortunately misunderstood. I think that you have to look at his whole body of work, and that includes films like Junior Bonner and Cable Hogue, films that really, I mean, he was trying to explore the entire breadth of human condition. And the things which sold the best, and this is unfortunately, and they say it's show business, and so it's half show, half business, the things that sold best were the most violent. It's an extraordinary piece of work because in Straw Dogs what you get is these incredible conflict of emotions. But it isn't just violence. There's an awful lot of other things. He's really interested less in violence than in the ironies of the human condition. It's a very ironic film, and the things that happen within it, I think, are really extraordinary. If you look at, I mean, he renames the character. The book was called The Siege at Trencher's Farm. The character there is George Magruder. In the film, his name is David Sumner. David is Sam's first name. It was David Samuel Peckinpah. He went by his middle name. Sumner is really where the first shots in the Civil War were fired. Sumner and I think he's digging for things that are inside the emotional makeup of these characters. If you look at the performance that Dustin Hoffman gives, it's a brilliant performance because it's a man who's trying to run away from himself, and he can't get there. If you look 400 years ago, from England, ships sailed to the New World in search of something new. Here is a man who comes from the New World, sailing east, and discovers things about himself he really is afraid of. It's uncharted waters for him, the same way it was uncharted waters for them. He's turned the whole scheme of things upside down. And if you look at what happens in the film, and one of the striking images is his eyeglasses, and they're shattered. If you look at that and think about what he's really saying, that's the way Sam saw the world. The world isn't clear and clean, and you don't notice the glass. It's this fractured image in which everything is distorted, not distorted, but actually made more complicated because it's a messy world. The world doesn't have black and white and nothing in between. It's this incredible gradations of gray that out of all of this mix of of anger and I mean, a man trying to find love. I mean, his relationship with this woman is one that is a trial. She is younger than he is. He has got certain demons inside him that he's trying to work his way through, and Sam was trying to work his way through. I think that if Dustin Hoffman had made the film without Sam, he would have made a different film, a much different film. He would have preferred the film to have an older woman, a woman who would have been like maybe 28, 29 years old, as opposed to a woman. Susan George at the time was about 20 or 21. I mean, very much a kind of Lolita-ish sort of girl, and that relationship between this man who is not completely honest with himself and this girl who's brought him back with her to this hometown where she grew up, is one which ultimately forces him, despite himself, to find reality, to find the truth. He's a man who is a mathematician, who thinks that he can turn humanity into an equation. You balance equations. She walks in and she erases a plus sign and turns it into a minus. She turns the world upside down. And he, unfortunately, or fortunately, has to fight his way through that. He has to find out what the world is about and who he is and how he fits within that world. So, Sam is really exploring all of these things simultaneously. He finishes Straw Dogs, and while it's still being cut, he brings his editors and everybody over to the United States so he can shoot Junior Bonner, because he has a deadline. The Junior Bonner is based around the Prescott Rodeo, which takes place on the 4th of July. And it only happens once a year. And so he knows if he doesn't get there to shoot the parade and all the rest of the things around it he needs for background, he won't be able to get it on film. He won't be able to shoot that film. He really wants to make that film. Now, Junior Bonner is the antithesis of Straw Dogs. So here's a man who's going from one extreme to another and back again, totally unafraid to explore all the facets of himself. Unfortunately, we keep focusing on, oh, he's the most violent filmmaker that's ever lived. I don't think that's true. I think that he's possibly the most misunderstood filmmaker, or one of the most misunderstood filmmakers that we've ever had. But I think that the more you look at Sam's films, the more they speak to you, and the more of the layers you begin to get through. You see things every time you see a film, whether it's Straw Dogs or Junior Bonner or Wild Bunch or whatever it is, there's always another thing you discover. That's what really great filmmaking is about. Sam was a master editor. He really understood how to grab the moments. If you look at his films, they really have an enormous number of cuts, because he really is looking for just a touch of something here. There's just tiny things. He was always looking for details, things which expose the humanity of the characters to the audience, things which you would not necessarily even see in a conscious way, but in a subliminal way they would work on you. I'm forever looking at his films and saying, why are you doing it this way? And you learn all sorts of things about yourself. He loved people to be upset with what he did, because it meant that he was reaching them. He was getting to them in a way which it was vital. The worst thing you'd say to Sam was that really I didn't feel anything. It would drive him nuts. I mean, what he really wanted is he wanted you to squirm in your seat. And and his films, I think, achieve a certain incredibly visceral level, because it really is something that comes out of his heart, and he wants it to come out of your heart. And the rape scene is an extraordinary scene. It's like no other rape scene I've ever seen on film. And the reason is it's the complexity of the relationships between the characters and the way in which two rapes take place. The first is done intentionally as a rape which gives way into a love scene. The second is the complete perversion of that, in which it is a violent and horrifying rape, in which you are in stark contrast to what you've just seen. That was the point of it. The point was that what is rape? He's really trying to examine what kinds of emotions we feel. Sex and violence are linked together in some mystical way that it's hard to describe. So if you can find a scene which allows you to explore what is sex. I mean, sex between two people. If you look at the character of Charlie and Amy, these two characters were at one point in love. They'd never made love, however, and that's, I think, a crucial point in this. That this was, she left before she went off to college in the States, and he was her boyfriend back then, and he always has felt cheated by that. And she now is in a marriage that's in crisis, and she chooses to involve herself with him, thinking she can control the situation. She believes she's in control until he hits her, and suddenly she realizes he's much stronger physically than she ever anticipated, and she can't stop what he's going to do. And the significant details that Sam puts on film. I mean, he takes her underwear and he snaps it. I mean, there's a sense of force in what he is about to do, and it slowly becomes the love scene they had never consummated 5 or 6 or 8 years before, whenever that would have been, before she ever left for the States. So by the end of it, what starts as rape winds up as a tender moment. She actually wants him to hold her at the end of the lovemaking. And for a moment, you're fooled, but you, the audience, are fooled into believing, well, maybe there is some positive part of this. Maybe this really is who she is. And then, of course, Norman shows up. And Charlie betrays her by literally holding her down so that Norman truly can rape her. And, I mean, even the positioning of it, I mean, one is face-to-face. The first one is face-to-face. And the second one is obviously she's mounted from the rear. That's a much more animal-like approach. I mean, that's, if you look at the anthropology of the situation, we as human beings come to we're one of the few animals who actually mate face to face. And one of the reasons we do that is that it is our humanity. It's the need to see each other, to communicate. It's more than just the sexual act. There's something else going on between us. Once it goes, when you turn it into an animal coupling, it is a totally different experience. It has nothing to do with love. It has everything to do with procreation or satisfaction in this case of the man over the woman. So so when you talk about violence and rape, that's what rape is. Rape is an act of violence. As a consequence, it's very hard to watch, and it should be. What I find amazing is that the notion that you would want to trim these scenes, you'd want to cut away part of it to make it more watchable. Wait a second, what are we talking about? Why are you making this film? Why are you doing this scene? You're doing this scene to cause people to feel uncomfortable, especially the second one, which is truly the rape. Do you want them to simply watch it and enjoy it? No, I don't. I want you to be upset, and I want you to basically resent and be angry about what's happening here. When she says in the end, they also serve who sit at home and wait. I mean, the truth is she has or is going through her own private war at the same time he is going through his. And the cross-cutting that's going on in the film while the rape is taking place, and he's out on the moors waiting with a sack for an animal that doesn't exist. I mean, he's being duped, and he winds up finally shooting a bird, and the first time he's ever killed anything, and he picks this thing up and he's disgusted by what he's done. There are really very emotional and visceral connections between that and what's happened to her. I mean, so Sam's imagery is extraordinary. He's forever challenging you to make connections. I mean, he had a great sense of how to cross-cut film. I mean, you make images work. If you look at the rape scene is less visual than it is really told in her face. If you look at what she is feeling, I mean, we see her, and it's an extraordinary performance. I mean, Susan George has never been better than she is in that film. And one of the things that's really amazing about the rape scene is that we see her run the gamut of emotions from things she's in control to fear to pain to horror to finally to softening into love, and then true horror. I mean, where all of a sudden this whole thing is at the end turned over again. it's what's in her face that's important. It isn't what's in her body. I mean, yes, I mean we do see certain details. There's a certain amount of nudity, but nothing like really what is possible. It's what's in your head. The reason people have problems with it isn't what's visually on the screen. It's what they're thinking about that's driving them crazy. If someone sees the rape scene and is excited by it, they're supposed to be. It is a sensual scene. It's very difficult to separate violence from sex in that scene. To say that we should ignore it is to say that somehow we're going to put blinders on and rape isn't going to exist anymore. That's not true. I think that as an examination of the complexities of human sexual relations, it is an extraordinarily insightful piece of work. And as such, it needs to be seen exactly the way he shot it. And the danger is that instead of doing that, we truncate it, we turn it into something which is much more palatable. And I don't think there's if we're talking about rapists, I don't think there's a rapist out there that would deter from going out and doing whatever he's going to do. I think that what happens in sex more often than not is what's going on in your mind. And what you see on the screen basically is augmented by what you're thinking as you're watching what's going on. The rape is much more difficult and terrifying and hard to watch because of our own complex feelings. We don't want to feel that way. I mean, part of civilization is that you really, things like rape are a terrible, terrible blight on society. But if we ignore them, if we say they don't exist, if we say we can't talk about them or present them in some artistic way that allows us to examine our own feelings, then I think we wind up ultimately falling into the very, I think, very wrong-headed position that we can censor ourselves and censor our feelings, and therefore we can turn life into something it isn't. There won't be any great films if we're doing safe things. I think you constantly have to challenge yourself. You constantly have to say, I want to make something because I'm not sure if I can do it. And Sam was always doing that. He was always taking you to the limit, and sometimes over the limit. Sometimes it got you to the point where you think, God, stop this man before he does something truly terrible to all of us. But it was a wonderful thing that he was doing, and he passionately cared about what he did. The films he left behind will be with us forever, I think. I mean, I think as long as we can show films, those are the films you're going to